Video 0, Introduction. I'm Rick Nichols. I wrote a book titled Make America Financially Great. This book is based on 15 years of research that included the 1913 Federal Reserve Act and the 1864 National Currency Act. The effect of my book is to restore Congress's decision-making power over money, thereby saving $1 billion per week in principal and interest charges that are budgeted to be paid to the financial bad guys. Freedom is the power to make decisions. Enslavement is having to follow the decisions of others. The 1913 Federal Reserve Act is said to be written by financial bad guys who conspired against the United States Congress. They maneuvered Congress into giving them the decision-making power over checking account systems, thereby enslaving citizens to the decisions of the financial bad guys. Our problem statement is we are enslaved by the decisions made by the financial bad guys. My plan is to use my knowledge of the 1913 Federal Reserve Act to outmaneuver the financial bad guys. The only other plans I have heard to fix our problems with this money system is to kill the Federal Reserve and/or go back on the gold standard. Just to be clear, I don't want to go back on the gold standard. Actually, it isn't that safe. That's the system that created fractional reserve banking. That's where the original financial bad guys loaned paper money but collected gold as repayment. The fractional reserve of gold caused bank runs in which citizens lost their money in the bank and paper currency. Today, our system is based on checking account balances. I don't want to mess up all our checking accounts by trying to fix a problem caused by a few financial bad guys who are controlling the Federal Reserve checking account systems. Actually, the part of the system that transfers bank account balances from account to account works well. Just because they are financial bad guys doesn't mean they are bad business people. They are actually very smart business people, and they built a solid system. For that reason, I don't want to kill the Federal Reserve. I want to capture it and make it our own, except for the fact that it is being used by the financial bad guys to infiltrate our government for the purpose of enslaving citizens, Congress, and the President to their decisions. It works fine. I think the Federal Reserve is professionally operated day by day by citizens who don't have a clue how it is being used against our country. I say we keep all the professional staff members but replace the very top decision makers. We ask our professional citizens in the Federal Reserve System to keep the system going after the financial bad guys run away. There is no doubt in my mind that our fellow citizens will step up. I say we keep them because of their professional culture. My plan was to study the Financial Reserve Act document until I understood how so much new money for nothing is being legally added to the system by the financial bad guys. Then I'm going to use that information to outmaneuver the financial bad guys by using the specifications in the 1913 Federal Reserve Act against them. The financial bad guys appear to be so strong they can't be overthrown. But the fact is, their power rests on the knife's edge of misunderstanding. The way to fix misunderstanding is to educate with the correct information. The correct information is written into the 1913 Federal Reserve Act. In reality, I also had to study the system that was in place before the Federal Reserve Act was written, and that is the 1864 National Currency Act. In addition, I had to study the 1816 Act to incorporate the subscribers to the Second Bank of the United States, and its big brother, the 1791 Act to incorporate the subscribers to the First Bank of the United States, because these acts were incorrectly ruled by the Supreme Court to be constitutional. And I also had to study Alexander Hamilton's 1790 letter to President Washington about the First Bank of the United States to recognize the Supreme Court error. Then I had to go all the way back to the great-grandfather of central bank corporations, the 1694 Charter of the Corporation of the Bank of England, to define terms used as financial instruments in all the United States Central Bank Acts that followed. I did all this research to make sure I know what I'm talking about, so I don't waste your time. A copy of these documents is in the appendix of my book, so you can confirm the legal facts. I say we should understand the system and then use that information to fix it. To understand the system, we have to understand the congressional document called the 1913 Federal Reserve Act. That sounds simple enough, and it sounds logical. What doesn't sound logical is, why do I have to say something so obvious as study the document that created the economy we are using today? Our problem is that professors don't have to study the 1913 Federal Reserve Act to become professors. Professors are taught about the system, but they are not required to study and test on the actual document to become professors of finance, economics, political science, and law. The way to prove me wrong is to search university class syllabuses. Look for classes that are required to become a professor to see if a copy of the 1913 Federal Reserve Act is provided or tested on in that class. I have spent a lot of time searching for a professor who teaches the subject called 1913 Federal Reserve Act document, so I could ask them questions. But there isn't any. In addition, I've looked for one professor who has studied the Fed Act and I haven't found one. And I've been looking since 1983. My story about professors of finance, economics, political science, and law that haven't been tested on the Act is in Chapter 1 of my book titled, That's Not Right. Since professors are not required to study the 1913 Federal Reserve Act document, they don't have a baseline of knowledge to compare against what they are being taught. Simply put, they are taught the wrong information, and they pass that wrong information to students who become professors who pass the wrong information to their students. I'll explain my interpretation of the Federal Reserve document in my book and show how it fits the real world we are living in. Then ask you to help me persuade professors of finance, economics, political science, and law to study the document. Do you think that a professor should study the document that created the field of study that they are professor of? Every professor I have asked to study the Federal Reserve Act declined because they say it's not their specialty. Actually, no professor specialized in the actual document or the history of central banks organized as privately owned for-profit corporations. That is why our problem continues and hasn't been fixed. We have been taught that the national debt is borrowed from people who buy treasury bonds from the United States Treasury. That's not true. The financial bad guys are the first people who buy United States Treasury bonds. They have total control of the reserves in the Federal Reserve System, which is no more than a checking account with the name reserve. They use this account to make reserves out of nothing by increasing Congress's account balance, and Congress unwittingly uses the reserve checking account to pay vendors and government employees. The vendors and government employees deposit the checks into our normal checking accounts. That's how so much new money from nothing gets into our checking accounts and causes prices to inflate. The quick answer to fixing the Federal Reserve System is to educate Congress that they don't need to borrow from the financial bad guys because they can create money from nothing and loan it to themselves for free. After all, Congress gave that power to the financial bad guys without knowing it. Once they understand what has happened, they can fix the problem right away. Once the problem is fixed, Congress takes $1 billion per week that is budgeted to pay the financial bad guys principal and interest on the national debt and reroute that $1 billion to rebuild American infrastructure or anything else they want that they couldn't afford. By doing so, they make America financially strong. Thank you for listening to the research of a fellow United States of America citizen.